Good evening. Welcome to the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So, Mr. Wolf, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Metcalf?
Here.
Commissioner Bundy?
Here.
Commissioner Chase?
Here.
Commissioner Lee? Here. And soon to be Commissioner Bendel.
So this is a very exciting night because we have a new commissioner, and Rebecca is here to do the duties of swearing in the three commissioners. So. There it is.
Hello.
We do them all at once.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say that I'm very happy to be here tonight to swear you all in. To swear you all in for another term and for your first term. And you'll soon learn that if you don't speak into the mic during the video recording, he will let you know about it very quickly. At the beginning of the oath, it does say swear or affirm, and I just wanted to clarify because people have asked in the past that you have the opportunity to choose whether to swear or affirm depending on your thoughts on that wording. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Robert Bundy,
It's Metcalf.
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and to the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. It's great to be fully staffed again. And, another 2 years. So thank you, Rebecca, for doing that. Anything else that you have to proceed with to
Yeah. Oh, you get this one.
Bob's wall is already covered with these things. He has no more room.
I think that's the one she gets.
That's one I get, yes.
She gave us the nice one, the embossed one.
Yes. My wall at home is called the Eagle Wall.
Is that the one you want?
Eco walls.
Okay. Oh, do we need her? Rebecca, do you need to sign this for me? Thank you.
You're all set?
She has the fastest signature in the West. Okay.
But I'm going to stick around to see your reorganization.
All right. Thank you very much. So now, item E is that we elect the officers of the commission, the chair and the vice chair. So the way we do it is somebody makes a nomination for the chair, and we vote on it, and then somebody nominates for the vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Peter Chase for chair.
Second.
Thank you. All right.
Let's see, I'll start with Commissioner Bundy,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Bendel,
Yes.
Vice Chair Metcalf,
Yes.
and Chairman Chase.
Yeah, thank you. And I would nominate Phyllis Metcalf for the vice chair.
Second.
Go again. Commissioner Bundy,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Bendel,
Yes.
Vice Chair Metcalf,
Yes.
and Chairman Chase.
Yes.
All right.
All right, so we're official, we're fully empowered, and at this point in the meeting, we always open it for public comment. So one side of the room is here for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 reasons. I don't know what they are, but certainly not for anything that we have on the agenda. So,
Speaker, I'm going to, as my first commissioner duty, recuse myself and sit in the audience as
All
a
right.
member of this community.
all right, so you're,
Excuse me?
what's your reason for stepping
Recusal.
off the dais?
I live within a very close distance of the property, 159 Prince Royal Drive.
Okay, so these folks are here to comment on that. And how many people are going to comment on that tonight? Okay, that's a significant majority.
Is anyone here to comment?
And anything else there tonight besides 159 Prince Royal? Okay, so I did not bring my timer tonight because I did not anticipate that turnout for this purpose, but I will have my watch going here and it will ding at 3 minutes, and I would ask that you really try to conform to that 3-minute because there's a lot of you. And a number of people obviously want to say somewhat the same thing, and that's fine. But please do respect the time of others, and we'll have a little noise, and I'm not sure what it's going to sound like, but it will make a noise. So now we're open for public comment. Would you please step up to the microphone, state the reason you're here, and if you're able, state your name, please.
Apologies in advance for how fast I read this, to cram it into 3 minutes. I'm Paul Tokars. My wife, 3 kids, and I live at 164 Prince Royal Drive. Our house is directly across from 159 Prince Royal, where the owners, Joel Hernandez and Stacy Ubico, have gotten approval to expand the size of their house from 1,780 square feet to what we understand to be over 3,000 square feet, including a new 3rd level. When they applied for that expansion, I asked them directly if they planned to expand the footprint in any way or build a 2nd unit, and they said absolutely not. And so on their word, I regrettably agreed to sign a letter supporting the expansion. I say regrettably because we just learned from the city 2 or 3 weeks ago, not from Joel and Stacy, that they secretly applied to the city to build an entirely new, separate 3-bedroom house that they're calling an accessory dwelling unit. If all this construction is done, it will mean a total of 4,200 square feet of living space in a relatively small lot on a steep slope. Had my wife and I known that the full scope of this, we would have strongly opposed the entire project. Anyway, the second house application prompted me to very quickly organize a group of homeowners who own 12 houses and live very close by to 159 Prince Royal, and they are just as strongly opposed to that second house as my wife and I. In fact, we've resolved to take this opposition as far as necessary and as far as we possibly can. And to that end, we jointly submitted a letter voicing some initial concerns to Mr. Wolf and Doug Bush shortly after we learned about the second house. And by the way, I want to publicly acknowledge that Mr. Wolf has been amazingly responsive to our, inquiry and willing to meet, et cetera. We haven't done that yet, and we very much appreciate that. But because the ADU approval process leaves us no other option to put our concerns on the public record, that's why we showed up today to volunteer on behalf of the group to go on record with these concerns and request that the commission deny the application. The particular concerns that I volunteered to discuss have to do with 1, the improper design of the second house, and 2, its improper placement. As for the design, as you know, the city's ordinance requires the second house match the existing house in terms of style and building form, color, and materials. Joel told me he plans to build the second house before he builds the first house. Before he renovates his current house. However, it's clear to me that the plan for the second house looks much more like the renovated the to-be renovated house than the current house. For example, the second house appears to have a flat roof, while the existing house has a pitched roof. On the other hand, both the second house and the planned renovated house seem to be the same boxy, modern architectural design and probably color, and seem to be designed to be made of a combination of stucco and wood stylized siding. The fact that the design of the second house will match the existing house is one independent reason that the application should be denied. As for the windows, the city's ordinance also requires that all windows of the second house be located to avoid line of sight into any existing nearby properties. However, the front of the second house will be directly across from our group member living at 1 Constitution, and as it appears that the second house will have 6 windows facing the existing homeowner's 2 large windows directly across the street. And this improper window placement is another independent reason that we think the application should be denied. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Just to state the part of policy is that we cannot comment on your statements tonight.
Fair enough.
But we
Thank you.
will take note of them.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Excuse me, do we state our name and where we live, just like we do in a regular meeting?
Please.
My name is Phyllis Galanis. My husband and I live at 215 Prince Royal Drive, Corte Madera. We were not noticed about the intent of the ADU to be constructed. And I think that that was an error. On the ADU, on what California says about them, that you can't involve, or you don't have to involve the public in it. They're not talking about houses that are wanting, the person wants to build on a hillside. When our houses were constructed back in the 60s, they were built only on one side of the street, on Constitution, on Prince Royal, on Granada up above us, and on Endeavor Cove up above Granada. The builder did not build on both sides of the street because the examination, the engineering exam that was done at that time said that because it was it's cut and fill, the houses where we are located are on bedrock, but the rest of the hillside is not. It is unstable. They didn't even allow access coming in to our property on the bottom of Prince Royal. I mean, on the bottom of Constitution, because if you've ever looked at this area, and many of you haven't, our properties go all the way down to the next street. The properties on Granada up above us go all the way down to Prince Royal. So it's a very different area and would not support a building of a almost 1,200 square foot house on the hillside. It wouldn't support any house being built on the downslope. We request that you have an independent engineer give us a report, an engineer that is not in any way related to the people who live in the house, that you do not do any kind of approval until that study has been done. I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous. This jeopardizes all of our houses along that area. About 15 or 20 years ago, when I was still able to run the hills like I did, I saw that there was a landslide on the property that was at the top of Granada, at the corner of Granada and Endeavor. It took major equipment to get that slide remediated, and then the current owner, or the one that didn't experience the slide, tried to get a house built on Prince Royal at the bottom of their property, and it was denied. Wisdom prevailed in that instance. I'm hoping that wisdom will again prevail in this one. This has to trump an ADU requirement from the state of California that says you can put this through without any kind of public hearing. That is just wrong, and they weren't considering this kind of a location.
Thank you, Phyllis.
Good evening. My name is Jan Kaiser. I live at 172 Prince Royal Drive with my wife. We've been there for 46 years, and we've seen some changes, but not in houses. We've seen the changes in the residents who lived in the houses. The interior of the houses may have changed, but nothing like what's being proposed and was approved by this commission back last year, and then when challenged was also approved by the town council. 20 years ago, I stood and spoke many times before the Planning Commission on always the same subject. And Dr. Bundy and I were on opposite sides at that time. It was all about parking. This, again, is, in my way of thinking, is all, again, about parking and safety. The issue itself is somewhat different, though. I realize that public comment may not be welcomed as it once was because of your restricted participation in working with ADUs. So, and that the town's planning staff has the right of ministerial approval on ADUs and BDUs as per 183105 of Corte Madera's Municipal Code in conformance with changes required by the California State Governmental Code sections related to land use. The changes eliminate any oversight by towns' elected officials, boards, and/or commissions. Every town and city in the state shall only allow, or not allow, or only allow, but encourage ADUs and BDUs in their jurisdictions without need of public input, comment, or due process. Now our town's ordinances have been modified to spread the process of building more housing and packaging more people into our neighborhoods. The idea behind all of this is that the state would like to have more affordable housing. Built throughout the state, and our backyards are as good a place to put them as any. The hook is that you, the property owner, get to build and pay for these new homes and then rent them out. They must be rented. The cost to build these new rental units on your property is a capital investment and can be deducted from your federal and California income taxes and most likely be eligible for accelerated depreciation as a business expense. If you want the deductions, you must rent the property at a reasonable price. Let's look briefly at the auxiliary dwelling unit as planned at 159 Prince Royal Drive. It's an 1,195 square foot split level 3-bedroom house with 2 baths and a flat roof that has all the charm of a 40-foot double wide construction trailer with no on-site parking as proposed. Now, if you would just tolerate me to go a little bit further,
Jan,
or I would give it over to someone else to complete.
would you please? Yes.
Thank you. One last thing I would say before I sit down is I see no provision in the floor plan for a heating system or hot water heater. Just an observation.
Thank you, Jan.
I'm Maria Elena Kaiser, 172 Prince Royal Drive, wife of Jan Kaiser. And continuing on with his, it says, find it strange that this is a new construction for a rental unit, does not take advantage of any American Disability Act incentive provisions for improving entry access, hallways, level floors, elimination of stairs, split level, and of course bathroom accommodations, etc. The planned flat roof is unacceptable in a wildland interface area due to the fact that they accumulate wind-blown debris and therefore present an unnecessary fire hazard. However, it is the lack of off-street parking that I want to focus on. Section 18.20 of the Corte Madera zoning ordinance, which appears to still be in force, requires a minimum of at least 2, 3 would be more desirable, off-street parking places for this ADU should be constructed on site. Based on the number of proposed bedrooms, 3, a clear exception would be no on-site parking would be required if under the new rules there is public transportation within 1/2 mile of the ADU. No such public transportation as such exists within the required 1/2 mile of the ADU. The only transportation is on Paradise Drive and is provided by Marin Transit on 2 supplemental bus routes intended for use by minor-aged school children, mornings and afternoons. Marin Transit Route 113 serves Paradise Drive westbound to Hall Middle School at about 7:45 in the morning and returns students eastbound from Hall Middle School departing at around 15:45 to Paradise Drive stops. The bus continues on to Paradise K. Marin Transit Route 117 takes students from Paradise Drive westbound at about 0724 with a stop at Neil Cummings Grammar School and then continues to Redwood High School and San Andreas High School. The Marin Transit bus returns the students eastbound to Paradise Drive, stops and to Paradise K, departing Redwood High School at approximately 14:30 and again at 15:30. Note, non-students may ride the supplemental Marin Transit buses. These buses will stop on request at the regular bus stops on either side of the Paradise Drive/Tamalpais overpass in the direction of travel. No standing passengers are ever allowed. The Marin Transit supplemental buses operate only on school days. They do not operate on school holidays, vacations, or during the summer or for summer school. Note, the on-site parking is very important to the neighborhood in that this intended ADU is on a narrow section of Prince Royal Drive and is at the confluence with Constitution Street, a very narrow street where parking on both sides of the street is discouraged due to passing problems. Further narrowing of these two streets by allowing more cars to park on these streets is not only unacceptable, it is just plain dangerous. Prince Royal Drive has another problem today, with many drivers exceeding the speed limit of 25 miles per hour by as much as 15 miles per hour, 40 miles per hour. Some years back, a little girl was struck and severely injured by a speeding driver on Prince Royal Drive or at near Enterprise.
If you would wrap it up, please. Thank you.
You want me to wrap it up? Okay, in summary, from our point of view, the Marin Transit supplemental service along Paradise Drive does not constitute a regular bus service. West and eastbound headways of 24 hours when it does operating cannot be considered a regular public transit service. Therefore, the Marin Transit supplemental bus service most certainly does not provide the proposed ADU with an excuse for not installing the required off-street parking. For safety's sake, insist that this ADU have off-street parking.
Okay, thank you. Who's next? No one sure. Okay.
Hi, my name is Manu Farahman, and I go by Mario. I have lived on Constitution Drive at the corner of Constitution and Prince Royal and directly below 159 Prince Royal for over 20 years, and have been a Corte Madera resident and a small business owner for over 30 years. My family and I very strongly oppose the building of a second home at 159 Prince Royal. The building of this home creates many problems for the neighborhood, and I know my fellow neighbors have discussed the major safety, parking, and changing of neighborhood character issues during their time. These problems are all important to me as well. But I will share my personal issues and major concern as this new house would be directly in front and above my home. My wife is a recent breast cancer survivor. Her doctor has said she needs calm, relaxation, and very little stress. If this home is built, not only will she lose the peaceful nature view she enjoys daily, but she will have the stress of months of construction and the dirt and noise of building a 1,200 square feet house from the ground up. Additionally, cars on our street and difficulty in getting out of her garage during construction, and once the home is occupied with car owners. Privacy is another major concern we have, as the house is designed to leave 6 windows facing into my family's bedrooms and living spaces. We worry about the drainage impact to our home, as this home would be built on a steep hill right above our home. Additionally, our especially needs son and my elderly mother are picked up on Constitution Drive by a whistle-stop bus numerous times throughout the week. It would be nearly impossible for the bus to get through to our house with the increase of cars parked on both sides of the street on Constitution. This is also a safety issue for the rest of the whistle-stop riders, other neighbors, and also the whistle-stop drivers having to get through the narrow street. I rarely have issue with the development in Corte Madera. In 30+ years, I've seen many of them, and most been good for our community and the economy. But this project or development is not good for my family or for my neighborhood. the potential benefit for just one family is not worth the safety, privacy, environmental, parking, and many other issues that will result for many families in our neighborhood as a whole. Please consider the critical need to stop such a project in our town.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tamila Fariji, resident of 163 Prince Royal Drive, having question about next door 159 ADU design. By permitted design of expansion of the house, originally you approved the shaved of retaining wall at east side of 159 driveway, going toward our west. Our foundation pillar we built to protect our slope down the hill foundation. And top of that, the excavation of the foundation of 159 west side, how can this hill be capable to be shaved more at ADU location on this disturbed land? But should town of Corte Madera hire and approve geotech to get the soil test, the slope static and seismic stability and analysis under the town supervision? The town of Corte Madera is responsible to do diligent research whose liability is if anything goes wrong on my property during and after construction over 10 years plus. We need a right to get a dynamic response of a structure design before any excavation. If the permit of ADU is issued and built, then 159 property owner life goes change in different direction, cause remodeling plan on 3-story never happens. Then what is the role of town of Corte Madera to issue ADU permit that doesn't meet the existing design? This land is uniform and respect with the other lots on Constitution Drive for the purpose of soil stability and preserving the hillside for critical safety issue. The permit, if happens, directly have negative impact on other residents. For the purpose of health and safety to preserve the hill, shouldn't this unusual condition to be addressed and get an amendment in writing by the town of Corte Madera, just like Christmas Hill area with their slope and narrow street problems? I'm sure Corte Madera town officials will balance the equal rights of all residents. Even though there is no need for ADU hearing, because my house is in jeopardy, officials need to hear me to be aware of my concerns and problems to give my rights as well.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Summer Tokars, and I live at 164 Prince Royal Drive. I am here to speak about the proposed second home at 159 Prince Royal Drive. We became aware of this plan when we received a letter in the mail a few weeks ago from the town. In March of last year, the Planning Commission approved the restructure of the primary home at 159 Prince Royal Drive. This plan changed the existing 2-story dwelling to a 3-story house, but had no plan to include any other structure on the property. To date, there has been no activity toward the renovation of the primary home. However, I understand the planning department has extended approval for another year to meet certain conditions, and during which time no additional permits are to be approved. I would like to focus on 2 conditions required by the Planning Commission's approval of the restructure. Number 1, a landscape plan was to be submitted and approved by the Planning Commission prior to the submittal of any building department permits and included minimum requirements for the site. Number 2, conditions called for plans for foundation work with possible submission to the Planning Commission. Now, as an end run around what are strict conditions for the renovation approval, owners are trying to find a way to exempt themselves from a review of the town to construct a second home on their property. Had they complied in their major design review and provided a complete landscape plan and a complete site plan, the second home would represent a complete departure from the approval given and would require oversight and review. I ask for the town and planning department to take this into consideration and deny approval for the proposed second home, at least until all conditions are met. I also ask that you consider the many impacts for surrounding neighbors if this plan were to be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who's next?
Hi, my name is Valerie Chu, and I live at 9 Constitution Drive in Corte Madera, and I'm very nervous, so pardon me. I'm here to voice my strong opposition to the permit for the accessory dwelling unit at 159 Prince Royal Drive. The proposed 3-bedroom house has no off-street parking and will make the already difficult intersection at Constitution Drive much more dangerous as a result. Prince Royal Drive steeply curves as it meets Constitution Drive, and it is difficult to see cars as they come down the bend. The fact that it's a steep hill means that cars are picking up speed as well. They can really be going fast. I'm super careful, but I still have my fair share of close calls when trying to emerge from Constitution Drive. A 3-bedroom house typically has at least 2 vehicles associated with it, more when visitors or if several drivers do rent the building. And these cars or trucks will live along the street at the intersection, blocking line of sight and really affecting visibility, making it even more difficult and dangerous than it is. The homes, the homes in this neighborhood have off-street parking for 4 cars or even more. They have 2-car garages with long driveways, some of them. This neighborhood design means that there are not numbers of cars left parked along the street. The area was planned that way, and there has never been any buildings or even a sidewalk along the steep side of narrower Constitution Drive. Squeezing in this detached 3-bedroom residence with no off-street parking means that there will be cars constantly parked along Constitution Drive and around the corner, blocking visibility. It will definitely increase the risk for those in cars, as well as bicyclists, pedestrians, and including the kids walking back from school and the school bus stops. The proposed building downslope of 159 Prince Royal will absolutely create a hazardous situation. Please use logic and deny the application for the sake of safety before someone is hurt. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. All right, who's next, please?
Hi, my name's Reed Albergati. I live at 160 Prince Royal Drive. So I understand that we're in the middle of a housing crisis right now, and I get why these new ADU regulations were passed. And my first sort of initial reaction when I got this notice in the mail was, look, it's not great for me personally because I have a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old, and their nurseries face right where this major project is going to be. But, look, we can make sacrifices to create more housing in our communities, which we definitely need. But that was my first reaction, and in talking with neighbors and learning more about this project, I really do believe that there are some safety issues here that I think we need to address. And those are the most important things. Now, some of this is repeating what other people have said, but I wasn't aware that the hillside is actually landfill and was never meant to be built on. And in fact, on at least 2 occasions that Phyllis pointed out in the past, houses have not been built on this hillside for this very reason. It could destabilize the hillside. It could lead to landslides, erosion, flooding. So I think the town should seriously investigate this before anything's done, just for safety reasons. And I felt it's important to stand up here and be on the record, because I'd feel horrible if there was some tragedy that harmed someone or God forbid killed someone. And second, the second big safety issue that I see here is the traffic. I mean, I live right at the corner. I see kids riding their bikes by. I see cars. I see, it's kind of a blind spot. I see cars kind of having to swerve out of the way. And I think, obviously, there's going to be more cars parking on this corner, including a house that's going to block some of the sight lines. So I just don't think it's a very good location for this. And so on the hillside point, I think that the town should ask itself: is it confident that the house will not destabilize the hillside and not compromise the safety of homes above and below and adjacent? And who's going to cover the cost of any damage if things go wrong? So look, I think these guidelines, these new ADU guidelines, are good, but even if you believe that Corte Madera should change and become a higher density town, less of a small town, I think you'd argue that that should not come at the expense of safety. I just don't think it's a very wise location to put an ADU. There are probably other solutions. I'm not against the owners of 159 creating an ADU. I mean, they have an approval for an extra floor, and maybe something else can be done. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Who else is going to stand up to the microphone and make a case? Please do so.
Good evening. My name is Mike Singali, and I am a resident with my wife at 13 Constitution. I wanted to go on the record on this meeting as saying that I also oppose the approval of the accessory dwelling unit at 159 Prince Royal for all the reasons that have been noted here, but for also two additional reasons. As described, the building site is pretty challenging. It's a steep hillside. Nobody really knows what the soil type, condition, stability, and strength is. And I think that it would be in the best interest of the neighbors, the homeowner, and the town of Corte Madera to get some more information about the soil type and what type of foundation will be required to hold a home of this size or any home to that hillside. It's going to be a substantial foundation, and I don't, from my perspective, judging by the very largely schematic and architectural plans that are submitted, nobody really understands that, including the homeowner. So I think that would be, if this is approved, that has to be something considered, and maybe the first step. It might get everybody the chance to make a better decision. The second point I'd like to bring up is that although there's 24 people in the room who strongly oppose this currently, property in this neighborhood in Marin, in the Bay Area, changes hands quite frequently. And over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the opinion may, see a sea change. And this could set a very, I think, a precedent that hasn't been accounted for. And that precedent is that all the rest of these properties, which have basically the exact same lot, large enough for 2 homes, with a steep downslope on the back, could say, hey, I have room for an ADU, I want one, and I'm going to put one on my property. Then we have every home on, or half the homes, or a larger percentage of the homes on Prince Royal, Granada, and Endeavor with accessory dwelling units, and the problem of parking and access is multiplied. And I don't know if that's been considered, and I hope I'm asking you to consider that, because it's very real. Well, you can't tell one person yes and the rest of the person no, the rest of the people who apply no. So thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mike.
Good evening. My name is Alan Hakimi. My wife and I and my 2 kids live on 17 Constitution Drive. We've been Corte Madera residents for 13 or 14 years, and we're actively involved in the community in Marin. I'm not going to repeat what my distinguished neighbors have already discussed, but I want to make note of a couple of situations where exiting Constitution Drive, which my wife and I do every day when we go to work, depending on the number of cars that are parked on Prince Royal and Constitution, is very difficult to get out. My wife has even told me at times, I don't even want to drive in that direction. I'm going to go down the other way on Windward Drive because she can't see. I have had personally a couple of near misses by cars going down the hill. The previous owner, I had to go to him and saying, you need to trim your bushes, you need to trim down the hillside because we can't see the cars going down the hill. He refused. My father-in-law took a trimmer, and actually we cleaned the trees ourselves. It was in a part of the property that was sort of in the easement area. Another thing that has not been spoken, we had a lot of rain over the past few winters. We have witnessed micro slides down our hill. My daughter and I clean up the dirt that falls down the hill. Also, some of our that hillside, people have thrown either wood chips or debris. All of that stuff flows downhill. They clog the sewer drains. We've had to unclog the sewer drain a couple of times, but there is dirt that goes down the hill. So I would encourage, seismic engineering, soil sampling, figure out that stability of that hillside. And I think we are all concerned that this hillside, if everyone starts building ADUs on it, will create an unsafe condition. So I'm here to voice my opposition, and I hope the town considers the safety of the various residents in the neighborhood, including children. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. Who else would like to stand up and speak tonight? Going once. So I think that I've seen most of you speak in one way or another tonight. So that said, then we're going to close the public hearing or public comment section for those things that are not on the agenda. I'm really glad that you all came out to speak. We cannot talk about the matter, but the department takes your comments very seriously, as do we. So I want to thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's an effort to put your thoughts together and get them on the record and stand up in front of the microphone. So it's all there now. So thank you very much for doing so. We can't say anything else about it.
Can I ask questions in general?
I
Not
would say-
pertaining directly to a process, not pertaining
Let's
to
not
this.
go there at this time. Let's just, you can ask Adam off the dais separately, but,
Actually, it's one I want to ask Judith
Okay.
about ADUs and process. Adam's off the hook.
So, under public comment, we can't really take question and answers for a process and things like that. The planning director, Mr. Wolf, has offered to all the neighbors to talk and has been talking to the neighbors about the process. And if commissioners have any questions, we can take those offline as well.
right, it's a open and shut part of the agenda. So, Adam can take your questions, and you might look at it under future addenda items as something to bring up. So, we can't really suppose a topic.
And just for the record, I mean, while the planning commissioners know that, just in as courteous to the members of the public, the planning commission has to observe the rules of the Brown Act, and that precludes speaking about having a discussion about any items that are not on the agenda and duly noticed, so that all members of the public can be here and have an opportunity to be heard. So it's not as if where the intent is in any way to squelch a discussion. It can certainly be a matter that is brought back for discussion about ADUs in general, ADU process, but just not at this time.
Okay, because I was just asking for a clarification of the actual law itself,
Right.
what it meant.
Well, we can do that separately, yeah, right. But thank you, Phyllis. I appreciate your intent and desire to do that. And again, thanks to all of you. We're going to move on to our business items, and you probably don't want to hang out for that, but if you do, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Didn't say that you could not have a public hearing if you did not have to make a decision at their level.
It was Phyllis's. Oh, okay.
See the difference?
No, I don't, thanks.
I didn't remember it that way.
That's
But
why I'd
I
like
think
to
we-
clarify.
I think putting this on the future agenda
Okay, so here we are, we're back together again for a business item. Adam has put before us a review and discussion of possible amendments to the zoning ordinance to allow for increased floor area ratio, FAR, for hotels. This has been long in coming, we know that, so Adam,
Sure.
have at it.
So first off, as I tried to make clear in the staff report, this is really just a discussion this evening, not for any action tonight, although it would be good to provide staff with some direction or comments on what we've proposed in the staff report. So I want to get that out of the way. But yes, if you, as many of you do, if not all of you, follow intently the town council meetings and hear their comments and their agenda items. This is really a follow-up to a February town council meeting where a discussion was had regarding existing land use regulations related to hotels in town, and really posed the question to the town council of whether or not we have appropriate policy and whether or not we should look at potential changes to FAR in particular. The results of that meeting got some pretty, I think, direct and unanimous feedback from the council members. So obviously we have some changes on the council now, but at that time that it was worthwhile to really look at. And there was direction provided to staff to explore some potential options, in particular for increasing floor area ratio for hotels as a way of incentivizing their potential either redevelopment of existing hotels, attracting new hotels to town, and so on. And so I've included in the staff report, attachment 1 was the staff report that staff prepared for the town council is in here. That was some information they reviewed, as well as links to the video and hopefully in the minutes. And so hopefully you got a chance to see in particular the conversation and discussion that the town council members had on that issue. So staff, what we're doing now is staff has drafted a sort of what I'm calling a conceptual framework in a way. It's a very much a draft proposal with staff's thinking at this point in time on how we might go about accomplishing some of the goals and policy goals set by the town council members at that meeting. As far as process goes, anything, this is again review and discussion tonight. This is a great opportunity to ask questions, sort of try to get clarification on certain things about hotels in general, get up to speed for the commission itself, and then also provide either comments or some direction to staff to come back with additional information, or comments specifically on the language that was included as sort of this draft proposal, conceptual framework. I kept going back. I didn't know exactly how to describe it, but there is some detail in here because I wanted to provide at least something to work with. So as you see, and for the purposes of discussion tonight, what I tried to do was break it into some distinct categories of topics, I guess, that are embedded within this conceptual proposal. And I thought I'd start and sort of walk through a little bit of this and some of the thinking behind what I presented to you guys this evening in draft form. So one of the first things is really thinking about where potentially we would incentivize hotels in town. And so this may not be applicable or appropriate for all locations. Currently, we allow hotels in C1, C2, C3 districts, and the MX1 district now, the new MX1 district, through a conditional use permit process. And they're currently maxed floor area ratio is 0.34 for all those areas, consistent. And thinking about where we might incentivize it, obviously we have 2 hotels currently in the MX1 district. We have 2 smaller hotels in the C3 district over in Casa Buena area. And staff has included, so, oops, sorry, I'm gonna have to figure out how to point to some of this stuff. Staff has also looked at, and feels it's appropriate as well to really start to look at the area between San Clemente and Paradise as a potential location for a hotel on the east side of the highway. But has identified 3 zoning districts where this would be appropriate, and that would be the C3 district, where we have 2 hotels or inns in this area, one of which is obviously in the process of looking at getting approvals for redevelopment, the Budget Inn, and the America's Best Value Inn. There's another area of C3 up at the very northern tip of Corte Madera. And then the MX1 district, which obviously has the 2 larger parcels which have existing hotels, and some other larger parcels as well in that location. The C4 district does not permit hotels, whether by conditional use permit or permitted use. But when we really looked at it and sort of looked at the uses in this particular area, it's really quite a range and mix of uses. And I think one of the sort of unique aspects of hotels in general is that they are somewhat compatible with a variety of different types of uses. Frankly, they were permitted by right. I know, and this is sort of maybe an extreme example, but in New York, for example, in industrial areas, and it was always seemed odd to me, but nonetheless was deemed compatible use with semi-industrial areas. This is even less so. I mean, obviously we have residential uses already in this area. Sorry, I'm trying to get the cursor to work. We have residential. We have some car dealerships that is similar to what we see on the other side of the highway in the C3 district. We've talked about some of the other uses during the process and the public hearings for the Amy's project. There's some general office uses, dog, kennel business as well. Then you have sort of more quasi you have sort of more semi-industrial, light industrial, I would call it, with some storage businesses and a equipment rental facility as well. And so, I think staff felt that this also was a potential opportunity to attract a new redevelopment to this area and a new hotel potentially to areas that would be compatible with those uses. In terms of FAR, and I was just going to point out as well that the general plan, all of these areas are actually in the light blue mixed-use commercial general plan designation that we've talked a lot about in the past. And in particular, here's the description of that in the general plan, and also noting that specifically in terms of floor area ratio, there are provisions to allow for the FAR to be increased if it's allowed pursuant to the zoning district regulation. So we've looked at this, and I think any change to the FAR in any of those zoning districts in with the mixed-use commercial general plan designation would be consistent with the existing general plan. So I don't see a need to, if this was to move forward, a need to change any of the general plan policies. So I wanted to point that out. FAR, this is the same information that was included in the town council staff report, and is in your packet tonight. The takeaway from this was really, our current regulations are at the lower end or the most restrictive in terms of FAR in the county, and even more so when you look outside of the county and look at some other jurisdictions. I would note that there was, as one of the attachments to the town council report, there was a staff report by the city of Novato, and they were studying 0.7 FAR, potentially in the North Redwood corridor, just north of their downtown. And they cited another FAR regulations for some other jurisdictions, more, generally larger cities, but nonetheless, there it's well over, 0.8 to 2 FAR in some of these other jurisdictions. Some other, I keep trying to pick up some more information. I don't know, there was a recent San Rafael proposal that was heard the other week, which was over, 2.5 FAR. Of course, very different context downtown in their downtown area, but nonetheless, just to give you a sense. Some of these are some of the other ones that were, not a lot's been necessarily built in the last 10 years in Marin. The extended stay San Rafael, this is the last one, which was about a 0.9 FAR. Our hotels range from about a 0.8 to 0.85. These are estimates. You can see what ours are. Definitely, majority are higher than what our current FAR allowance is. And so that's another point, that if some of our existing hotels, for whatever reason, were demolished or destroyed, that really could not be replaced with the existing floor area that they currently have, with the exception of the budget in. Staff continues to sort of, as we get more information as we can, to sort of see what's being built, how they are. I did, just to go back to the other one, Fairfax, I just talked to their planning director. They don't have an FAR cap, but they have a 2-story cap. So it's a little different way of determining the maximum allowable area. And then you see with which gets to one of the things, one thing, FAR, as we know, changes. The intent is to make it change as the size of the lot changes. So it's proportional. The amount of square footage you get is proportional to the size of your lot. So it theoretically should work with smaller lot sizes and larger lot sizes. However, what sort of needs to be factored in is that some things don't change. Some site requirements, such as parking and setbacks, and those things are consistent no matter what. So on smaller sites, it becomes more difficult, without going higher, to really fit in the required parking and within the setbacks and whatnot that isn't proportional to the lot. Those things remain constant. So one of the things not in the current sort of draft that we've looked at was to start to consider, is a minimum lot size appropriate? What sort of hotels are we trying to incentivize, either redevelopment or attracting? So I started to consider whether it makes sense to really, as we get higher FARs, and as we'll talk about some of the findings and some of the sort of requirements and some of the things we want to see as a requirement for achieving greater density or intensity, FAR, it becomes, in my opinion, at least at this point, it becomes more difficult to achieve all those things on smaller lot sizes, whereas if you have bigger lot sizes, you're able to have a little bit more flexibility in site planning, design, architecture, incorporating other things. So what I didn't mention is as part of my intro with what the town council, their discussion was, clearly the policy direction was, yes, it makes sense to have potentially higher FAR, provided that a number of things, we get really good projects out of it, and so I should have said that up front, but I will focus on that now, and that's really comes down to the way we look at that and the way we have in the past is either conditions or findings, and in this case, we've looked at making a set of supplemental or a series of findings that really try to address some core values, not only that the town council has raised, but many of the planning commissioners have raised in the past as well in relation to, in particular, I think in relation to commercial projects in the past. So, and things that come up time and again. What you see in the draft is really a number of findings that I have up here for reference, but they're obviously in your staff report that are trying to get at that, and you'll see that the language is, it's, you know, these are, I won't say it's easy to write findings, but you're trying to really make sure that you get, in order to meet it, you sort of get the things that you want, but you allow for enough flexibility so that somebody with a good idea and a good project or proposal or site plan can have some creativity in what they do. So that's the sort of the balance there. But I think the keys are that you're really trying to address these sorts of things. So you'll see environmental sustainability, those are things we always ask for. But in the finding, what we've said is you have to exceed what's, you know, the baseline requirements of Title 24, and it's got to be quantifiable. We have to know what that is. So that is part of the finding. So it's a higher standard, you know, that one. And some of those are, you know, with the public realm and bike and ped, you know, again, sometimes we require those things as either whether it's mitigation measures or whatnot. Well, you got to do more than that. You know, you got to go beyond what's going to be normally required from a standard level review or requirements through a CEQA review. So those sorts of things, you're able to do that. Now, when it comes to, I'll say flood protection, this would be, harkens back to some of the prior discussion we've had in the past regarding whether or not hotels are commercial uses or residential uses, and there's seems to be some different interpretations on that between FEMA and the building code and whatnot. But this would just say, look, if you're doing it and you're getting the FAR, you're meeting the, you're going to meet the standards for for residential development if you're currently in the FEMA flood hazard area. That's this, number 2 here. And furthermore, and I think this is the first time we would actually look at sea level rise formally in a sort of a requirement or a finding, but if you're going for this extra floor area and it's going to be a new project and it's that, you know, we start to forecast, is this area going to be in a hazard area based on sort of a 50-year forecast of sea level rise? And it's trying to get at that, you know, and if you are, then, you know, you might as well plan for it now and talk about how you're going to basically act as if you are for commercial construction in a flood hazard area moving forward. The number 3 really relates to community integration. It's trying to get at that and talk about how programmatically, through the site plan changes or mostly through program, really going to provide, as it says here, could be operational commitments, encourage public use, community gathering supports, community health and well-being. One thing we heard was that from the town council was we don't want projects to wall themselves off from the community. We want it to embrace and sort of have a relationship with the community. So I think you get at that through programmatic requirements and also through public realm improvements and that, you know, site planning, some of which we've always, you know, I would say these aren't new ideas necessarily, but some of which we've talked about in the past, and some of which in particular the MX1 was designed to do to try to make sure that there's some activity at the streetscape and so on. And then, last but definitely not least, architecture and design, and including some findings there that, again, try to embody how we think a project needs to incorporate and be thought thought about in terms of its design and architecture, and ensure that a project that's coming to us is going through that sort of thought process from the outset, that they are taking into consideration, as you see, some of the existing site constraints, turning them into opportunities. You know, some of this language I understand is sort of, you have to get into how you interpret that, and that's ultimately would be up to the commission, but that's design. At the end of the day, I think a lot of that is, would be up to the commission, but this, I think, is intended to provide some sort of guiding principles about how to organize a project that's going to ultimately be successful. So with that, that's really what I had to bring tonight. You know, I'll open it up to you guys, and happy to answer questions, and by all means, you know, I think it would be great to have you guys provide comments and thoughts about big changes or little changes, either way, to what is being presented here tonight, or here that it's in the right direction, and I think it's appropriate to move forward, so.
Thank you, Adam. I know this has been something that's been on your mind for a while. It's on a lot of people's minds, so thanks for preparing us for it. So I would start with the commission up here and check in with each of you. There's a basic premise here of this proposal, and that is to increase the FAR on these properties. It's not to keep it static. So I'm going to start over here with you, Phyllis, and say, are you on board with that premise of increasing the FAR with conditions and so forth, basically?
Okay. This too has been on my mind, and I did watch the council meeting where you did the presentation. I followed it. There is just one concern I have, and I don't even know if it's possible. I want to see the FAR increased on these properties for hotels. I mean, when you consider the fact there's only one in town that's under this 0.34, it shows that the FAR that's established is not the right one. My concern is, can the increase of the FAR be limited on these properties to use as a hotel? If you say the FAR is now going to be 0.5, does that mean an office building can come in with 0.5? Does that mean any other kind of business can come in? Is there a way of saying the FAR is X? Sure. If the property is to be used as a hotel, the FAR will increase to Y?
Yeah, and I think that's a good question. And the answer is yes, and that was the intent. So if you look at the way that I sort of did a sample of how this might look like in relation to the MX1 district.
Okay. What page, Jim?
This is, I'm sorry, and I was.
At the bottom of the page?
It's attachment 3, so I'll keep going all the way, it's toward the end of the packet.
Yeah, well, there are numbers at the bottom of the pages.
I actually didn't.
It's the ones that have the CDs.
No numbers? Okay.
Yeah, there's no numbers, right?
It looks like a sample zoning ordinance. It's about 4 pages from the back.
What is the first line at the top?
July 20th.
Dim near the.
No. Up, like, this says implementation program LU, something, whatever.
I thought that's what.
It says 1813-145.
Okay.
Go all the way to the back.
Propose, just verbiage.
If you count 4 pages back from the back.
Okay, thank you.
Attachment 3.
Yes, that's
Yeah, we're
correct.
in
Attachment
attachment
3.
three,
And
but
I
four.
will use element. There you go, right there. You have it. So there you can see in subsection D, in the provisions for increasing resident, floor area ratio. Specifically, it talks about it specifically calls out and says the FAR for hotels as defined in section 1804-355 may be increased. So it's hotel, but you bring up a good point. It should be hotels and sort of accessory, not only hotels, because for example, if there is a restaurant or something else associated with it, it should be, I mean, I guess your comment could mean it may not, that should be separate, or it could be included within the 0.65. But typically, the way I would probably look at that would be, it would be hotels and accessory amenities or something like that, or accessory ancillary uses. And sometimes it's typical that restaurants are, that's one I can think of, are ancillary uses to hotels. So it could be, but it is, the way it's written now is it's only for hotels, not for all the other uses would be limited to what they're currently allowed.
That's what I support. I think it's very important that we don't increase FAR for hotels and then find us with a bunch of large office buildings or, that's something to look at separately, but not that somebody comes in, some developer, and says, well, the FAR is, I can do such and such. They're both commercial.
Right. So the proposal is currently in this document for 0.65.
Correct.
So, we had previously in other applications discussed having something around 0.55 or so forth. So I'm just taking a temperature of where you stand with the 0.65 versus 0.55 or anything else we've discussed in the past. Maybe come back to you.
Well, and I was going to mention, because I know this has come up as well, but there is specific language again, and that's the maximum, and it's not intended as a target, and that sort of language that, obviously the planning commission may prove less than the maximum.
And we may figure out a way of getting to 0.65 from a 0.55 if it meant some incentivization or some other elements of the program that they satisfy in order to get that, if they really do a superb job.
And that one other point, the way it's also drafted currently, and I think you may want to comment on this, is that all of the findings have to be met to have any increase over 0.34. So that's it was intentional. It is a high bar as well, I think, because you can be good in one area, but you really have to address all of these different findings in order to get above 0.34. And then I would imagine there's points along the spectrum of how far above or how strong and as a whole that would, and then ultimately just the massing and how well the design and the architecture and the massing and the site planning work on a particular site. In addressing all that, that may influence where you land from 0.34 to 0.65.
Right. Okay, that's good. Phyllis, anything else before we move on to Dr. Bundy?
No, that was essentially my concern.
Okay. All right. And Sir Bob?
Yeah, Adam, I thought this was a nice package you put together on things to review that. I really thought about the budget in process as I was going through this, and that this would hopefully incentivize them to come back with a real project rather than a makeover of a 40s motel into a 70s motel. I think the floor area ratio is sort of a blunt instrument anyway, and thinking about it in various individual projects, but I certainly would support going to the 0.65 with the stipulations that you have about the amenities, the importance of architecture and such.
Good. Thank you, Bob. Mr. Lee, where do you stand on this in general?
I think it's good to incentivize developers to basically meet all the kind of findings that are being put forward and being rewarded with larger FARs that make them more successful financially for the type of hoteling that we're hearing from applicants that they want to build, right? I guess, maybe we can talk about it later, but there's a few more fine points as far as what those criteria are that I'd like to discuss. So if you want to come back to it, I can come back
I
to
do, I think, but in general, you're.
Yes, I'm definitely am excited to talk about
Okay.
this and how it can benefit the community and applicants.
That's great. All right, Ms. Bandel, this is your first opportunity. So you have the opportunity to weigh in on whether you're supportive of this direction or not.
So I'm going to step back and take a broader look at it because I haven't been in on the nitty-gritty discussions. But when I was reading the material, I sort of had a question in my mind by incentivizing, whatever that word is. Are we doing that that's a two-part question, kind of. Are we doing that to encourage more hotel building? Is that like the baseline idea here? We want more hotels in Corte Madera, so we're making it more attractive for people to come here to build them?
Well, I think the council's direction was that it could be help in providing additional flexibility for either existing hotels to redevelop, but also may be appropriate for attracting a new hotel, or maybe one of our existing hotels decides to do another use that's appropriate, that's allowed in their current zoning districts, but we attract another one somewhere else. So it's allowing definitely, it's trying to incentivize, I don't know, as a whole, necessarily more building, but yes, I think there was a recognition that a higher FAR would provide more flexibility for, and a greater likelihood than today, for either retaining and rebuilding existing hotels or attracting new ones as well, or both.
So, still stepping back, has there ever been any kind of, study of the impact of hotels on a small town? The socioeconomic impact? I look at the corridor along the marsh area. I don't know what you're calling that, and that's like right across the road from homes.
Oh, this area.
Right.
Yep.
That homes are right on the other side of that, and I see, are you trying to develop another Tamil Vista sort of boulevard there of businesses and hotels and restaurants?
No, this is just, it has a current C4 zoning district, so those properties could redevelop today. There is a San Clemente specific plan that actually has requirements for setbacks and signage and whatnot. That's not proposed to be changed at all, but would allow for the introduction of potentially a new use here if and when any of those property owners thought it was appropriate to reconsider what they currently have existing there today. It might make it more viable for potentially a hotel to be a potential use there. And not that, obviously there's a lot of decisions that would have to, there's a lot of things that go into how things get developed and who's making the decisions, and more than anything, obviously, a lot of times it comes down to who the owner is of the property and what they want to do it in their own personal sort of interest. So it doesn't, there's no grander scheme. It's sort of, there's a variety of allowable uses today there. It would add a hotel to that mix, which, given what's out there today, seems compatible with the rest of the uses. And some of the sites are significant enough that it could provide opportunity to reach higher FARs than otherwise would be allowed under the 0.34. So it's, these are all, there's a lot of things that would have to happen in order, at the end of the day, we're talking about sort of probabilities and possibilities, but it would open the door for more flexibility and more at another location where potentially a hotel could be located.
So just so I can get an idea, What was the
Sorry,
Best Western issue, the issue around that building? What was that? That FAR was going to be 0.34?
No, it
they
was going to
wanted
be
more.
higher. It was proposed originally at, I think, 0.55, and that's in the staff report as well. I think it's referenced in the town council report. So, yeah, that was a proposal essentially for the rebuilding of it at a higher FAR, saying that it was too restrictive to rebuild at 0.34. And I'm not going to go into the details, but yes, the answer to your question, it was a higher FAR, and there was
And they were
argument.
asking for what? They were asking that it be 5.5?
0.55.
If I may, Margaret, just to, in your pursuit of the bigger picture, and if I may be so bold as to say that the developers in general and the council have looked at the 0.34 and said, we're not going to get a economic turnover with that limitation in place. And that's why Adam's provided the comparison to other communities. And we've heard that, and people have said they couldn't revitalize a property at that restrictive level, given the value of the properties going up. I'm being very general here, but,
Yeah.
And then that another use of the property, like an office building or retail, then becomes more appealing to those property owners, right? And that's just the economics of how it's been presented to us. And do we want to thusly, use that word, incentivize or make it a more economic promise? They have to perform, but a possibility for these properties to have a hotel on them and
Right.
maintain that.
I just hear the word incentivize to me means that you're giving away
Right.
something, is where I feel like the words that are constructed here are actually asking them to provide more to the community to be allowed to do something like that and make it economically feasible. So I think it's not just a giveaway to encourage more hotels. It's about encouraging hotels to think and construct in a certain way that allows them more land rights, right? So that's.
Yeah, and in terms of, you asked about socioeconomic, I mean, I think the one thing we do have as far as hard evidence was more on the economic side, which was in the staff report, and that they are, the current existing hotels are important from the TOT tax and whatnot that they provide, obviously as a percentage of the total, general fund revenues. I think it was approximately 5% or a little bit less than that. But it's also, I think it's been shown that, hotels do have other benefits from a local business perspective and off sort of secondary economic benefits with providing, visitors coming and spending their money in town, essentially. And then there were a lot of comments. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, but a couple of the council members mentioned that, we have also, it's great to have places for your family to come and stay when they come into town, or when you are rebuilding your house and it's you need to find another location. That's, a particular type of hotel maybe, but nonetheless, it's those sorts of amenities are there. In terms of other aspects, obviously we're talking about all of it. We don't have vacant land in Corte Madera, so you have sort of a trade-off in terms of what traffic and other other sorts of issues that may come up. That's a comparison that always gets analyzed, but generally hotels are more of an off-peak sort of type of use, depending on if they're visitors. If that's generally what happens. Sometimes, though, you do have hotels that provide a resource for people who are working in the area as well, so that it can change from project to project. It needs to be analyzed really more on a case-by-case basis.
So out of that sort of provision of information, are you in support of that, this idea of creating conditions more favorable to the hotel FAR or not?
Can I take a pass and learn more
Okay.
about it?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. You know, you've provided some basic outlines of stuff. Some of it's intentionally squishy or, you know, non-specific, but I'm definitely for it, and trying to create some standards that not only you can use, but that we can use at the commission. As you say, these 5 findings would have to be fully met. And so that's a long road to go, really, to get there. And I look at the state density bonus item in here. How would that apply in this case, or what did you think it would apply?
No, yeah, that's in the MX1. That was a existing existing code for the MX1, so it wouldn't apply to the commercial development. It would only apply for residential construction, if that were done.
So then the other things that we can actually create incentivization for is to take each one of these categories, some of them actually, and say if you add solar, if you add gray water, if you add certain types of energy consumption, you know, you can create a higher density perhaps on your property by doing a checklist, or we simply say to get to that you must satisfy these things. So there's 2 ways of doing it. It has to be, or
Right, the condition, that would be a conditions project, and these are findings, right? I agree.
yeah, to either say solar requirement, depends on the location, provability, sustainability study of solar, and then you can go down the list and say gray water holding tanks, rainwater holding tanks, and whether they become conditions of approval or just boxes to add to the value of FAR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and frankly, I think a good example of where we had conditions and findings was the drive-through ordinance, which had a 3 or 4 actual conditions for doing a drive-through, which were just mandatory. You're gonna do this, and then on top of that, there were additional findings that we're trying to assure that on a case-by-case basis, it met additional findings. So that's correct. Yeah, you could do it, set it up where either those certain sustainability things are required, or I think what you're getting at is sort of, go ahead.
So I wanted to speak to that a little bit more detailed. So I have that I was interested in exploring the idea of a mix of qualitative incentives and quantitative incentives, right? So quantitative incentives would be if you provide, X amount of renewable energy, you qualify automatically to a certain, percentage of added bonus, right? And so there's these, not mandatory, but highly important aspects we would love to incentivize to come in. And part of the reason I think that that's really important is I've seen a lot of applicants come in and they fear the uncertainty of the decision-making process. And so it at least makes some of that and the commitments that they've chosen to go down automatically kind of reimbursed. And they also can easily assess whether that's financially feasible or not. And I think that that's a discussion internally when we do incentivize it, what ones, are
rise to
right, like for the community and then for them, and where that balance is. But that's in a quantitative one, right? And then the qualitative is architectural expression and stuff that still comes to the planning commission and can be evaluated on a case-by-case basis because we're calling for more regional or site-specific elements or interpretation of shadow and viewing and all this other stuff that is very much it's nearly impossible to quantify. It's always a quality, and then what percentage of the FAR is tied to that. But ultimately, even if you do all the quantitative, you will not get it if you fail in the qualitative review. So that I think that's what I was interested in, a more fine detail about talking about.
Right. I think that's good.
Yeah, so that would fall under, environmental issues and so forth. Dr. Bundy is our resident flood expert, and it seems like it would have to either be a dry-proof building or not, right? Or it's raised above the floodplain, so those issues would either be raised above it or...
Yeah, that actually, you're right. That number 2 could be written as a condition rather than a fine. It's not really it's not really finding. It's actually, you're right. I think the way even I wrote it would be you must do this.
Yeah.
And that would be, it could be a project condition. If you're a hotel and you're in the FEMA flood hazard area, you are going to meet the requirements for residential construction. And if, and then I'm curious what you think of the sort of the second part of that, which was sort of like, if you're not in the flood zone today, but based on a 50-year estimate of sea level rise, you will be, even though I think basically all of our sites that we're talking about are already in the flood zone, so I don't think we have to worry about that, but that I thought that it was trying to get at this issue of like, look, we have some pretty good projections now and where things are going to move, but we could, given actually that we are already, all of these sites and all these zoning districts that I pointed out that are at least included now I believe are all in it. I could confirm that, but anyways, I was curious about the second part. But you're right, that could be written as that actually is a project condition.
Yeah.
Please give us your
I think
contribution.
on the Casa Buena, the America's Best, it actually is out of the flood zone.
Okay.
The building itself is out of the flood zone, but, in the future, it
All right, well, there
could
you go.
be.
That would be
But I would certainly want to see the threshold raised above the flood stage as it's currently projected, as opposed to trying to dry flood proof, which is going to take a bigger footprint and is less satisfying, I think.
Right.
So with that said, the 11-foot nav is where we are currently, and CMI was going to be at 11 foot.
Yep.
And Budget In is going to try to be at 11 foot.
That's the
Maybe.
most recent. Yep.
And then the America's Heritage, I don't know if that's out of the plan.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it either, but I believe what Bob's saying. So
I was told this by the owners of the building. That theirs was just above, where the footprint of the building is just above it.
So it would say likely that if you're in it today, you have to raise your building out of it, because that's what residential, you could put parking underneath it still though, like a residential project could.
Yeah.
But you'd have to raise the finished floor out of it. And then presumably we would say, based on that sea level rise estimate, that, we can reasonably predict that the America's Best Value in another 50 years is going to be in it. And, or by that time we've solved all our flooding problems and built some walls out there. No, I'm sorry. And therefore even though today they wouldn't be required to do anything, not even wet flood proof or, get up to the commercial standards, they would actually have to be required to do that.
And the MX1 is entirely within the floodplain.
It's interesting. I think the DMV site is the one, and Marketplace, to be honest, I think is only a portion of it, because it starts to slope up there. So actually, it could apply to those as well in terms of the future. Okay. But yeah, the majority of those, I think, 5 of the 7 are within it today. 5 of the 7.
I think Tam Ridge is above.
They're out of it. Right.
So looking around, I sort of hear a consensus dry proof or at 11 foot nav, a requirement, and so forth. And then the community integration aspect is something that can take a lot of forms.
Mm-hmm.
So what does a hotel do to integrate? Well, at the Corte Madera Inn, they talked about many things that they would do, having the building be used by the community, the pool is not going to be a community integrated pool, or at least in their last proposal. So,
In any of them.
yeah, so what would you guys propose as this community integration aspect that would be either a point system or some sort
Like
of
a requirement.
mandatory community integration? What does that look like? Bob, you have something on your mind?
Well, just the Tamil Vista corridor, where we really want to create a nice streetscape, that would be part of what you would want to see from the Corte Madera Inn or hotel that goes in, as well as pedestrian and bike friendly. But the plan to have a conference meeting room that could be used by the community as well as any other entity that wanted to make use of that would be an important thing to have in the plan.
So if there's square footage allowed for it to have some sort of an assembly point or a use of the building for community purposes, and that they could actually be a storage point of emergency supplies, various things like that. I think the Howards might have some input into what would go into it. But anything else from anybody else about it? Community integration?
Disaster preparedness.
Right, so that's what those guys are about.
So the one I saw that I haven't really understood Corte Madera's stance on is the public art, and a discussion about what that really means and what, I haven't really heard any dialogue about ever, when in San Francisco or at SFO, there's a mandatory percent for the arts. And, I think also because this is somewhere where people are coming from outside the community, but then this is their, home base and understanding the community, is art and an expression of regional or local artisans and stuff like that something that would be important. And, do you force them to do it or anything like that? I don't, I just hadn't heard any dialogue, so it was just nice to see that mentioned in any of the discussion, because I hadn't yet up here seen that in there, and I just wanted to get a take on other people to speak to it a little bit, because I think that art does truly enrich the community. So
Was that, and that was, are you referencing somewhere where it was mentioned, or was it in the minutes, or?
It was actually mentioned about public art.
Public art is one of those difficult definitions, right? Some communities will have a, in lieu of fee for.
Petaluma has that.
Yeah,
They're doing that.
and so if you're not putting up a.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I will say from my perspective, as you started out discussing this, there are a lot of different ways that one might program, and this is really the programmatic aspect of a project to support community integration and get at it, whether it's public art to actually like you can use our facilities for X, Y, and Z, or or some of the other things. To me, it would be hard to start to say, or a privately owned public space or a plaza or something like that. To make it a requirement and to assess some floor area or bonus specifically to that, you'd have to put so many conditions on the condition. So like if you're doing a public space, it's got to be X square feet and open these hours. You start to really. You have to create a real threshold that this is going to work, and you could write paragraphs just on those thresholds themselves about what each of those things mean in order to start to get the bonus. That I will say that like privately owned public space, there was a good 10 pages in the city's ordinances that have that stuff. So I just. That's why I left it as a more of a open-ended a little bit, but that there's fully an expectation that you do something. I do like adding a public art as potentially an option too,
So what you were talking about was another thing that I wanted to touch on, and it goes back to the idea of just making it specifically a hotel versus like a mixed use. So I think of the larger cities in our region, right, and how those hotels function, right? Number one, big FARs, if you go to the Embarcadero and go into that plaza, it's beautiful inside that building, right? And then it's a mixed use, so it also is attached to offices. It has some commercial, some of the high rises, a lot of them nowadays, they're doing a mix of hotel and office, and because it gives more flexibility to all three entities to work in synergy with each other. So I was a little hesitant to want to bind it to just kind of a residential use hotel, right? And kind of understanding that we're in a very dynamic period in our evolution in commercially, that, if WeWork comes up with a new solution of some pseudo live work office solution where the hotel's attached to the office, right, where they're all shared working, that might be a benefit. So I personally, that exclusionary stuff, like I think if a property owner really wanted to come and do something experimental and kind of forward thinking, it might actually benefit the community down the run. And so I just wanted to express my concern with wanting to just do that, especially if we're looking at going into another area where we're trying to upscale the commercial uses and get more maximum value out of the properties for the town and the community, is just a hotel versus a more robust offering really a better approach. I just wanted to say that. But
I was thinking of the hotel use as the focal point. I mean, you go to hotels at resorts and they have all these boutique stores there, and there's an office complex and stuff, but it's a hotel. That's the focal point, and that's where my mind was leading that project in Mill Valley that I like so much. I always forget the street, Miller, where they've got some stores on the bottom, and then there are live work above, and behind it they have separate townhouses. I mean, it's a beautifully integrated project that works. But I think to just say you can go up to 0.65 on a commercial property leaves too much open, that you want to focus more on what you're looking for. And I was listening with the public art. I would hope we don't get into the definition, because everybody has their own. And I can just picture, after what Garrett Greelou has gone through with his hotel, us coming back and telling him we want a tilted Coke bottle next to the hotel side by the freeway. I mean, we've got to be very careful of what we consider to be public art.
But so I guess when we're talking about convention spaces or some kind of how does that all get wrapped up in an understanding of a hotel? So if you give them 6.5 for doing a hotel, but then can it be a certain percentage actually of that FAR has to be assigned to livable spaces versus other, or do you want to get that prescriptive? But I'm just saying, either you open it up and it's a hotel and whatever else can make it financially feasible, or it's not.
Well, I think the direction was clearly about focusing on hotels, but and we started there with, is this only for hotels, or hotels and ancillary uses, or some other amount? And maybe there's a way to write it where some other amount of that FAR could be used for some other purpose that also goes to meeting some of these findings and whatnot, such as integrating with the community, with the public, improving the public realm, because clearly some of those other uses could, like a restaurant, for example, may be associated with a hotel and and attracts the community to that space, and therefore makes it more of a viable space. So I think some proportion. You're right. I mean, instead of just defining it as 0.65 for just hotels, we should probably still, while keeping hotels the centerpiece of it. My suggestion would be allow for some flexibility so that there is some, I don't know, we'll have to figure out the wording for it, but we can do that.
I agree. I think that we stick with hotels, keep it narrow, but the only thing that really becomes a community integrated factor into a hotel, which I suggested to Mr. Greelou, was to create employee housing units on the site. And I think that if staff might say, okay, so for every employee unit, they get a half a room, and so they do two employee units, they get another room, right, out of the project as an incentive bonus for some formula for creating employees, because everybody has to drive to that hotel to work, and many hotels need a overnight person. And if they could create a comfortable enough unit, then they would have a reason to have a person there on site, and it's a person who is a member of the community then, because they live there. So, it's not just an empty hotel, but, 2 units or something. This is something I think takes a little more discussion to narrow it down. And I would hate to open it too wide in the public hearing for that, because we'd get everything under the sun, I'm afraid.
Well, Peter?
Yeah.
Following that idea, which I like very much, we all discuss every time this comes up, is the commission or the council, we have limited land. But, I don't think there are too many vacant lots here. That somewhere within this, and I don't know the wording to really use to make it legal, that there should be a statement of, due to the limited access to land for projects, that it should be understood that each project should be looked at individually to see how it meets the findings and the requirements, et cetera, and have that little bit there, because just going back to what you just said about Garrett Greelou, and you could say, yes, we want some housing for employees. But that hotel that's over on the other side of the freeway with the auto businesses, I can't remember the name of it, the 1940s upgrade.
Budget Inn.
Comfort Inn.
There's not a place for them to build some little huts for their employees.
Right.
You can't expect the same for each, and that's why something could be put into the findings and the requirements, that there is leeway depending upon the space, the setting, fitting within its
Right.
environment, et cetera.
Agreed, that's a good suggestion, and I think that it has to be a evaluatory element of the findings that somehow reaches a bar, or, I don't know quite how to define the bar, but it is, you have to assess whether or not it's a property that can do
Well, and
something.
I was going to say, that's why I think to some extent I was looking at the minimum lot size requirement, which would eliminate, smaller properties from consideration, just because it becomes pretty tight.
I have a copy of the San Clemente plan. I think I even have it with me, I keep it in my folder. And going back and looking at the people who were on the commission and on the council at the time, and those I know, it goes back to 1979, by the way, and I don't think there's ever been any updates on it.
There was an attempt and it failed.
Yeah. The idea, I was told, of the .34 is when the ordinances were put together and the zoning, and a decision was made to automatically say for commercial .34, that was going to be a placeholder, that eventually different types of property in different locations would be looked at. It never happened.
Right.
All these years later. So maybe as long as I've been on this commission, there have been several times when hotels have come up, whether it is just a remodeling, not something like, rebuilding the Best Western, et cetera. Every time, and this is prior to you, Adam, they would ask for an increase in the FAR, that the FAR, they were either over it already, and to make any remodeling, they'd have to fall into it, that this has been a problem with the hotels. I'm talking about hotels. And every one of these things, and I just think we have to be realistic. and I hope we will be.
Can I just go back to the one thing Adam brought up?
Yep.
It was about the smaller lots.
Yep.
So I had concern about regulating it only to the larger lots, only because of my experience of traveling abroad, and even my experience of living in San Francisco, is that the best hotel experiences are usually the small pensions or kind of boutique hotels. And so by basically saying we're only going to have mega hotels, we don't allow 30-day rentals or less, right? So by opening up more stock to these smaller experiences, acknowledges that there still could be that kind of business model allowed at a commercial level, not in residences, but not that you have to go stay at a giant corporate. And so that's why I personally was not interested in trying to limit it. But, that's my own personal.
Right, I was just, I'd have to do some more, we'd have to do some more sort of modeling and whatnot, but it's just becomes challenging to stay within 35 feet, which.
Right, so they self-regulate, but I mean, I'm just saying like.
And the setbacks and whatnot, and, so, and I would note that, frankly, the last smaller hotel, the project that we did have is, and there still are, proposing to remodel at .34 FAR, so it's just, it seems to be able to be doable, and not in every situation maybe, but because it's smaller, maybe the value associated with the .34 favors a hotel versus some other use that would have a limited sort of capacity on that same site. So there's a lot of things. I understand the point, but maybe it's worth coming back to after we see the revisions to the proposed budget which we should be seeing in the next, hopefully in the next month, in August at some point, so.
Yeah, it is touchy. You can't ask for a restaurant or a community room or any of that with some of these properties. So what is their overall score, or how do we look at it?
Well, and I come back to this scoring. I think there may be aspects of this where you could score, but I don't think you're going to get that on every one of these things that you want. I think there's a balance between requirements, which maybe the flood and some of the environmental sustainability things. You could just say that's going to have to happen, or at least go through the solar study and show us that it doesn't work. But you're going to do it if it works, and just start like with those sorts of things. But I think other aspects, it may be better to leave more flexible and have it just be qualitative, like you're saying, and some sites may avail themselves to only being able to do a little bit more on this and a lot on on the design, but you can't really get a great program because you're constrained by other factors with the environmental, keeping what's on your site protected and so on. So, it's a balancing act. So I think maybe what I'm hearing is that try to suss out what things could be real requirements and maybe attach a certain percentage of the bonus to those requirements. I think you gotta be careful, but you can do that. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you.
Qualify for consideration, right? It's not a.
Well, but it gets to your certainty thing. Like if you do solar or produce X amount of energy for your project on site, you can get 0.05. I mean, is that the sort of model that you're thinking?
Yeah.
Right. Because like you said, the 0.64 is not the goal.
No.
It is a maximum target that you could achieve, right? It's like, to me, it's like lead scoring, right? Like platinum or beyond is always the hope, but ultimately, the cities only mandatorily require lead in a lot of locations. So it's going back to that kind of incentivizing a reward system and falling back to kind of the standard that you as a community want to promote, right?
Sure.
So.
Sure. I really like that idea of like a sliding scale almost. Some things are for sure, and then the rest is a sliding scale. And I keep thinking that if Amy's could produce a building with all those wonderful features to it on a very small space, I think that even the smallest lot could probably creatively think of some ways to gain more or, bounce up their sliding scale part of it. And it's a really good way to look at
Yeah,
it.
but to Adam's point, we don't want to box ourselves into a corner, so having sort of some flexibility and leeway on our part or the staff's part to guide somebody through some ideal goals
Well,
and get there.
I do think there's some that are like I think the quantifiable, and you could attach some percentage or proportionate amount like that to that. If you meet this, you get X, and it's some percentage. You have to just make sure you're balancing and leaving enough, room. You're sort of setting that as sort of like this is a priority, and you start to weight things, your certain goals, and a little bit differently once you start to do that, and you start to get priorities. But yeah, I mean, I think there may be a way to do sort of the minimum threshold requirements. Some may be maybe not minimum threshold requirements, but if you do this, you get this, and others are going to be more just, we want you to show us how you're accomplishing these goals. And it's more flexible, but it's very clear what the town's trying to get out of this project. And right now, I'd just say again, the requirement is that all of them, you got to do something with respect to all of it if you're going to start to get more floor area. Anyways, I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I think that we have two more elements. The second one, architecture and design, I think we all believe that we know that we're going to hold the bar really high. But when it comes to the public realm bike and ped, I think there's a whole host of elements that you could add to hotel requirements or possibilities, right? And I would look around and say, we've got the basic thing that employees are encouraged to bicycle, and there are facilities for bicyclists to get to work and shower and store their bikes, so forth. Then there's the idea that you actually have a space for an Uber or a Lyft or something else to stop in front of the hotel or be a part of that project. You can add a parklet, right, to the hotel that is a stopping place for bicyclists and for pedestrians. Some of these places don't have good sidewalks, so we would insist on the sidewalk program to be a part of it, and the barriers to traffic at these hotels. We've seen all of these things in different project proposals over the last few years, and that could be a big list, I think, of stuff that would contribute. So I see some nods, but I think it all would be important to incorporate that into the mentality and the apparent visibility of all of that in the hotel.
Right, but so there's the mandatory measures, then there's a whole list of, here's 50 different things. You can choose to do all 50, but if you do 25, you'll qualify for this much, or or maybe you don't have to do all 50. You ultimately, to even be successful, we only need 25, but if you do 15, you're only going to get X amount of extra FAR, right? That's what I'm talking about. The quantitative is that you give them a much grander list of incentives that the community desires, and the developer ultimately gets to understand from their branding and their, which ones would work best in their economic model, right? Like, so that I'm not saying that it's all of them, or it could be that we just have a big list of things that we currently acknowledge. And the other thing is there a mechanism to add or decrease from that pot of things as new technologies come on board or something? So what I'm saying is for that incentive list, is there a way where it's not so prescriptive to basically move things in and out through multiple, or is it just fixed? Because I feel like
That's the challenge. And that's why the flexibility, I think, with an ordinance is what you
So is there a way to also then modify the ordinance without, or certain line items within that ordinance without a larger kind of, how could you get it in there and expedite it if Uber now does air taxis or something like crazy like that, right? Like that.
Yeah, and this again. So I think we're getting into sort of like ordinance construction and framework and how you do it. I mean, I've seen there are one option for that I've seen recently where things are developing rapidly. I wouldn't recommend it here, but would be to sort of have an ordinance that by references a policy that has been adopted by resolution of the council. And therefore, instead of going through the whole ordinance amendment process, you can sort of shorten that process through resolution. But I think, I think the idea that we're going to create a list that that encompasses all the different things is a little bit, from my view, a little bit ambitious or too ambitious or too, we don't know, we're sort of, I don't like, from my own personal planning mind of how to construct zoning, I find it sort of limiting in a way that you sort of don't encourage somebody to say, well, what about this? You sort of, well, you got your menu, you got your list, I'm just going to do what you say, and then you sort of cut off ideas that maybe we don't think about.
So LEED has whole sections
Yep.
of innovation credits that are up for interpretation, but are still follow under that quantitative assignment of line item, right? So I get what you're saying, though.
But maybe on a bigger picture, if the idea is that we're looking toward a sort of a quantitative system, I mean, we have, even amongst these 1, 2, 3, there's 5 sort of, I think, goals here that was listed up here that are trying to get at, right? Is there are we starting to think of one of these, is there any sort of priority or weight that you would give one of these more than the other, that we could start to assign some values or some, or are they equal? So because right now, the way they are, you all have to meet all the findings, and frankly, I guess we could boil it down to 4, because if we make that just a condition, that pulls it out of a sort of a finding and makes it just, you're not getting any points for that, you got to do that, period. But if we take it down to the other 4, are we sort of saying you can get to a maximum for each sort of policy goal here, and so we're 0.35, let's say we have a total pool of additional 0.3 or 0.3 FAR, and each one you can divide that by 4 and you get a maximum of each one at, I don't know, 0.7, whatever it is, 0.75. There's different ways to design it. And I think the architecture and design, we've already agreed that that's going to be more sort of just by, you see their you see an architect and how much they've invested in their architecture and the materials and thinking through this. So maybe that's not going to be a point-based system. That's just going to be saying, hey, we think you get X out of that. But the other ones as well, I think we need to, it may be helpful to understand if we're designing sort of a point-based system or an FAR per finding system.
Exponent or a multiplier.
Are they all equal in your minds? This conversation.
So to dovetail and echo what Adam said is,
and within that, I think you're going to say, and within that, are there any of these line items that are weighted more than others?
okay. So when you look at ordinance construction and drafting considerations, I think it'd be more helpful for you to focus on we can figure out how to do that once you make your recommendations to council and council makes their, final decision. So to focus on and maybe rank, are there certain areas that as Adam said, that you'd weight higher than others. Don't worry about how the ordinance is going to be drafted or how specific or how detailed or whether it's going to have a companion policy document by resolution. Keep in mind that ordinances are supposed to be somewhat, as much as you want it to be detailed, you want it to be fluid and flexible so that every year or in the winter when we are more concerned with flooding or we're more concerned with fire issues in the summer, things like that, or seasonal issues, or, it may change year by year, it may change season by season. You don't want to lock it in so specific, so it'd be helpful, because this will come back when we draft an ordinance. I mean, your recommendations will go to council, come up with an ordinance that'll be brought back to you for consideration, will be final review. It's probably more beneficial for staff to have an idea of, do you weight some areas more heavily? Are some things that are so critical that you want spelled out, that you think are real priorities that would tip the balance? But keep in mind what's important in 2018 or 2019, if this ordinance were to be adopted, might vary in 2020, 2025, and we want to create, something that, might withstand the test of time. So giving us general guidance and giving council guidance as well as to staff might be more beneficial than the nitty-gritty details
Right.
tonight.
So I'm thinking that, go ahead, Adam.
Well, I will just recap what I've heard so far is, one, that right now this is based primarily on findings, where we can start to pull some of this out and make it more, some things just standard requirements. So conditions in order to even start the conversation. And then secondly, there may be a way to basically provide some certainty to an applicant that if they do certain things that we're able to quantify, especially under like the environmental sustainability one, I think is a good one, that there's some assurance that they're going to get X, maybe it's a minimum above, or maybe it's a, maximum or minimum, I'll figure that out. We'll come back and talk to you about it. But some certainty that they're going to get some amount of FAR above the current requirements. And then similarly, try to do that with other ones, although others may be a little bit more challenging, and if needed, we could supplement that with either in the staff report as part of this ordinance or other sort of policy guidance about the public, like all these ideas, these other things that could work or what have, I don't know.
So just to summarize, though, we are headed for a public hearing about this regardless, and that's our first step with this. So,
yeah, I mean, so there would have to be public hearings. I would want to, based on what I'm hearing tonight, I'd want to come back in sort of a similar form that we're doing now and actually talk, have another conversation, make sure we're sort of trying to, nail down what you're talking about here in some sort of format that before we went to a real public hearing, I'd want some.
and before I check in with the commissioners, I would think that one thing that might help the process, as we've discovered with other projects, is that not only do you have a process with the applicant, you have the development application that is now part of the state law, and then secondly, a study session with the commission before they've gone too far down a road, right, with some of these things to find out where they stand, if that's a reasonable element.
With the commission? Sorry.
A study session.
Or workshops.
With the applicant.
Oh.
Specific project.
Once they go through what you've got to say, and you sort of phrase it for them, and they get to a point where they say, all right, here's where we'd like to present this before we commit too much pen to paper.
And that could be even, I was thinking about that too. I mean, that there may be some process stuff that could be part of a requirement to get extra, that you do, right now it's a recommendation, and generally people understand why. But, you know, you could stick that into an ordinance as well and say you have to do a preliminary hearing. I don't see why you couldn't, as part of you know, this incentivized thing, you know, just to give.
That makes me think, so the public energy, right, if you do the incentivize, like you install solar and you do all these things for your house, the home energy upgrades.
Yep.
If you then also open up your house and have people come in, they give you more reimbursement for giving basically a lesson about how that process went.
all right.
So I guess, you know, if you really want to incentivize them for opening it up to, you know, Amy's, for example, they had the banquet where they gave people the food and stuff, and it wasn't, you know, it's not always required, but it could be like, hey, you know, this would be a really good thing to do. I know in a couple instances they were already doing that in the hotel realm.
Well, I think
but
at
I'm
the
just
very
saying,
least,
like,
I was thinking that you have a scale model, you know, certain things that would, you have certain renderings, you have a scale model. I mean, you start to get into like, are we then saying, because we're requiring it for this, that we don't want it for the regular design review? You're like, no, you don't want to, you know, you kind of want that certain standards anyways when you get to process. So I think you almost say more by, it's a little tricky, you say more by saying that it's required here and not required with the other processes than if you just say, this is what we want and do the right thing, you know, so, or make it a standard for everything. So we probably could address that in a different, or, you know, some other way, those sorts of things. But nonetheless, it's open to sort of thinking about other things other than just these policy goals.
I didn't get Amy's food. Phyllis?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind Adam, when you were talking about the bike ped and things could be done, there was that study done by I guess it's called the Bike Ped Commission, that's about this thick, that was approved by the council a year ago.
Yes.
I would assume that they have things in there of what they would like to work towards in the future, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel to see if it's there already.
Take a finding from the study rather than having a bike ped review of the project, which might lead to a long-term aging process. So, you know, I think that we could definitely get that. I think that's important as a part of that bike ped thing, is to take some
it's there.
element of
See
that.
what you can use from it rather than try to start from scratch. Because I've got a copy at home and I couldn't tell you what was in it at this point.
So to Adam's point then, Phyllis, I think I know what your ranking of this would be, but would you care to quickly spit that out, 1, 2, 3, and 4?
But we're leaving out flood.
Yeah, because Bob's going to make sure that it's dry-proof.
Yeah. Could you get back to that page, please?
It's fussy. Yes.
There.
Okay. Well, you know how I feel about architecture and design, and I think it's so important that every building fits into its natural environment and the environment of what is built up around them. And as part of those guidelines that you and I had worked on, environmental sustainability is a part of it. We did a little bit of talking about community integration. I think in many ways community integration is a given at this time. When you look at a small town that is maxed out pretty much, that all decisions have to be made in how it integrates the community into what is happening, et cetera. And I say the bike ped thing, they've got that study, and I'll leave it to those who have far more knowledge than I do.
Right. Okay, so, you know, in a way, architecture and design sort of leads you from one to the next of these things. They're interconnected, but architecture and design would be top of the list. Environmental sustainability, public realm, and then community integration. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, these are now packages. We can't look at things independently anymore and hope eventually they'll fit each other. There is no eventually. Eventually is now. And I think decisions we are making are ones that this town is going to be living with long after we are no longer here living in the town. And I think it's important, if we are making the type of changes we're making as respects hotels and some commercial buildings, we take into consideration today and tomorrow, and not just today and hope we'll reach something tomorrow.
Dr. Bundy?
I would agree with Phyllis's assessment on that, architecture and design and environmental stability, sustainability are the sort of the two important factors, and everything else flows from them. The smaller hotels are just not going to have the community integration to the extent that a larger one might have with community rooms. I'm in favor of leaving things sort of loose and a little squishy. I think the statement you have in the ordinance under environmental sustainability is such measures may include but not be limited to, solar, gray water, et cetera. And so, you have some examples, but you're also leaving it open for other possibilities that may fit the site.
Do they need to join the Lions Club?
No.
Okay. Charles?
Yeah, I think just from what I understand about major design reviews and the purview of the Planning Commission, definitely architecture and design needs to be weighted to give the ultimate decision-making for the big bonus to the Planning Commission. That's why I would really emphasize that, and it's so critical for how it's perceived in the community. Right? The environmental sustainability, to me, is just as important, kind of in being altruistic, but then to me that's almost prescriptive sometimes. It's not an evaluation, right? And so, but it should have a good weight compared to the others. The community integration, I love the community. I think it would be great if every building contributed, but ultimately they're private properties, and enforcing too much, public accessibility and public amenity at the cost of the functionality of the property and the private ownership. I'm more wary on that. And then the pedestrian and bike improvements, or any other street improvements and sewer improvements and stuff that would be a necessity to even accommodate a larger FAR, right? I think is once again a little could be kind of prescriptive about its impacts, right? But then it takes it down as far as the weight and importance to the Planning Commission, and ultimately we're crafting the ordinance to help us and in understanding how to evaluate the applicant, right? So that's
All
my
right.
2 cents.
Thank you. Margaret, what would you like to contribute to this?
I don't see community integration the same way. I see it as being, when something is well-designed, as far as the architecture and the design, that's part of integrating into the community. When you only have a small space and a building is going up within distance of where people live, it has to fit in with the ideas and the designs of what's nearby. And to me, that's part of community integration. It has to, I remember going to a small hotel in Florida, it was a hotel, it was billed as a hotel, and actually there's one in Capitola also. And it looks like it's part of the block. That's integrating into the community.
There's one
That's
in
making people
Fairfax.
feel comfortable with what's being put up there, and I see it as part of the architecture and design, in addition to, if it's a bigger space, having a community room. But to me, that's not as important as having it look right in the community. I think in this day and age, environmental sustainability is almost the same as flood protection. I don't see how anybody can think about building without being environmentally friendly anymore, and I don't think new buildings should be allowed to be put up without being environmentally sustainable. We can't do it anymore, not in our day and age.
Very good. Okay. So I think we're kind of on the same page here about finding a way to emphasize the architecture element, and I'm starting to think more that a study session that might go back as far as a massing study and a basic concept like they did for Scandinavian design, that said, here's what we're thinking about this property. They talked about these elements that you created in your Tamla Vista study, and then you have somebody that says, okay, we've got this much space, we want to put a restaurant here, we want to create a public thing here, we want to do this here, and we can either get down a road where that's an agreement or not, instead of getting to a point where they've got 35 feet and, 0.55 rooms. But if we say, okay, but then the structure has to include the environmental elements, the solar panels, all of these various things, and it has to be, it has to take into account the bike and ped intentions of the town and what it is that the town has really tried to commit to. We have a bike and ped committee. We have people that are really vocal about it. It's kind of like, don't ignore this anymore. You need to bring it into the design and make it a reality so that it's not a future hope. You get the sidewalks the right size, you get, now we're going to have charging stations for bikes within a year. And that's a reality. And the electric car charging and all of these things are coming down the pike, and we need to address it without specificity, but with certain, we can be able to impose elements on the project.
I guess the only other follow-up would be, would you like to see sort of trying to get into some more specificity? I know I heard from Commissioner Bundy that he likes how it's worded, but to get into more of this requirement, like Commissioner Chase and Lee, I think you guys mentioned that you'd like to see more like certain things should just be required, and we should, if you're going to get above 0.34 FAR, one is, from a process standpoint, I'm already hearing, you shall do a preliminary hearing in front of the Planning Commission, so that's a process thing, but you shall also, in relation to environmental sustainability, do X, Y, and Z, and try to elevate those things at least to a minimum, and then beyond, and then it's more beyond that to do additional things.
Can be or cannot be met sort of things. Like
Right, I get, yeah.
So I thought a little bit about that, how basically we don't write it in our own ordinance, but we encourage certain things. So there's a lot of, so if you say lead, right?
Yeah.
Lead within itself is constantly reinventing itself, right? So it
it's
is the
so is our
flexible
building
list of rewards.
Our building code is next year we'll be requiring.
Right, so,
solar
and
for-
same
so-
with well building, or like, so I'm not saying I favor any of those things. Maybe what you could bring back to us is, hey, these are the 10 that the communities abroad in California are all using to basically really encourage this next level of building development, and say, do you really, this is the payback to the community, to the developers, to everything, and,
Right.
and these are the ones that are really seen as a benefit instead of a burden, right?
Right.
Because ultimately, we don't want to burden developers and then de-incentivize it by
Right.
tagging on something
Right.
that they can't make feasible,
Right.
right? I mean, you can do that with a city entity and city contracts, right? But it gets more sketchy when you put it on the
Shouldn't do it
public.
for cities either, but yeah, I get it.
So,
Yeah, burdens.
so that maybe that's the way that
Okay.
basically we could embed
For
it,
certain standards,
and it's
yeah.
still kind of squishy and flexible, and we can see the future through those, but not actually get down and say it's this, and this. And,
Okay.
Well, your last paragraph, the whole thing about getting to a target is not intended as a target to be achieved, but rather as a maximum allowable. So really good design, really efficient design will give them a more, maybe, not always, more intensive property use, higher FAR, if it's really well designed, right? But not always, a really good
Well,
design.
no, I agree, but I think that's, the way I'm hearing from the commission right now, that's only part of it. You may only be able to get half of your bonus if you could have and there is overlap. So clearly, how you view architecture and design and those findings and how it's worded here relates to, you're not gonna get like a great design project and then just have a crappy public realm. It's like, that doesn't,
Well,
or environmental sustainability features. So
I'm thinking of the new Zaha Hadid hotel that just opened up in Macau. It's the most amazing architecture and design I've ever seen, but ultimately in this community, if it didn't meet some of those other
Right.
requirements, forget about
Okay,
it, right?
good,
So.
As a certain applicant said to me one day, well, you guys didn't want a box hotel. We don't want a box hotel.
Yeah.
So this has to make sure that that's not even on
Yeah.
somebody's plate.
Yes.
Have to
Yeah.
understand that it's not that.
That's why when we look at these elements that you're putting together, we then have to apply them individually
Yeah, absolutely.
to the project. Because different projects will have different pluses and minuses than others, and I think it's important. And we also, I think, and I don't know the right way to do it, I don't want to ever see our commission and our staff spend over 3 years on one project that ends up going nowhere. There has to be some understanding of time constraints, that certain plateaus, let's say, will be reached at certain times, because what went on with the Best Western upset the community, wasted a lot of time, and certainly was in no way helpful to the applicant himself. And I don't know how you're going to do that, Adam.
So, there's been a lot discussed, and we want to get out of here, but I think that you've got a starting place, or do you feel like you want to ask anything else?
No, I think the biggest takeaway is trying to pull out some of what's here, some of the findings into conditions that as much as possible, and then thinking about how to potentially assign certain amount of FAR, but if, more certainty into the amount of bonus you're going to get if you do certain things. So those are the biggest takeaways I have. I'll try to work on something that goes that direction, and we'll see what it looks like, and we can discuss at the next meeting. We have this, I think, to me, I think, in a sense, this is a fallback. I mean, this works because I still think, and I think we're all in agreement, we should be focusing on these 4 main goals, policy goals. We've touched on them all. They're sort of articulated here. I'm seeing a lot of agreement that these are articulated okay. They can be massaged in a way that more gets certain requirements that we want, and then may be able to sort of weight things a little bit differently, so that we're not sort of, someone does great on public realm and they're expecting the max FAR by getting an okay, because these other things, okay design.
Well, I like the idea that you have at the end that the .65 is a maximum and not a given, because too many people think the figures they see now are what is allowed. And they have to understand these figures are maximums.
That's right. So, yeah, I think there's a way to
You'd
do
be,
that. I mean,
you'd be sure that's written in somehow.
Oh, it's in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we good to close this?
And if you have thoughts in the meantime, let me know.
I have just one, I don't know if you're going to talk about the minutes from last.
Yes, we will. We will get there shortly. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, and it's a good discussion.
It is. I
So,
appreciate your comments and feedback.
I think, Dr. Bundy, you were at the last council meeting, were you, that I was at? I don't recall.
That was reported on in the last meeting.
That's right, okay. And there's been no council meeting.
Correct.
Yeah,
And
since-
there was
okay.
not one
So,
last week.
Yeah, we're on to anything if the planning director wants to tell us about anything?
What was I well, I think right now, just as a heads up, you know, and we'll get to this in a second. I don't have any reports necessarily to provide. We may, or I'm still working on the next agenda, just so you know, so that's 3 weeks out. You know, it's possible we may have something related to budget in, just don't know yet at this point. We'll figure it out over the next week or two, probably within the next week. And we're still finalizing dates as well on the workshops for the cannabis ordinance as well, so just a heads up on that. But we're looking at late August for that.
All right, anybody going out of town?
Sorry, just to be clear on that, we weren't proposing other workshops at the planning commission. Planning commissioners would be welcome to attend, of course, but it would either be at the community center or up here.
Right, okay. So that said, we can go right on to the minutes. So,
I'm actually going to call a couple things out there, actually,
Okay.
that I noticed in the interview. Once we drafted this and put it out there, and then I saw it, I think, yesterday. So,
Are you talking about the minutes?
yeah, I am
from
talking about the
20?
minutes,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Please,
No,
yes.
no.
So under 56 Madera, page 2, third line of the first paragraph is just a typo, so we'll get that signed, noting, not note 9, NG. And then the second paragraph, second line, Mr. Wolf discussed the proposed modifications to the sign that would include a new corporate logo with a blue color scheme, not blue and brown. So brown should be struck, blue and brown.
our note taker is taking note of that in her absence. Right.
And then I'll also get, I noticed under adjournment, it was wishful thinking maybe, there it said 7:35 PM, and I think it
what I
was
noticed.
later than that, so.
Yeah, I was a little bit jealous of that one.
That would have been nicely done, but.
Phyllis, did you have anything? You weren't?
I have to abstain. I
Yeah,
wasn't
you weren't
at
out
the
there.
meeting.
So, Mr. Lee, any notes from? And Margaret, what was your question?
Well, I just know that I left before the meeting was over, and I left it after 9, so I was pretty sure it wasn't 7:35
I
that
think
was
it should be
adjourned.
9:35, I think is probably what it is.
Well, I see one. If I recused myself, am I also capable of doing a nose?
No.
No, I don't think I am.
Yep.
Page 5.
Page 5.
I think I recused myself.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So then, a voice vote on the notes as noted.
Move to approve.
All in favor?
Aye. Okay.
Abstain.
Phyllis abstains. I'm an aye. And with that, I'm going to say, let's adjourn
Thank
this
you.
meeting. Thank you.
Can I just say one
oh.
thing?
Wait,
Okay, I will not adjourn the meeting. So, Margaret, yes.
I see that I'm to attend a meeting at the town council on August 7th, but I'm going out of town on July 31st and won't be back for 2 weeks.
Okay, August 7th.
So I'll trade with somebody, but
I didn't have to do the 17th, so I can do the 7th. So, okay. And agenda items, Bob?
I would suggest that we revisit ADUs just to discuss some possible issues related to that for a better understanding of it. One other thing I was interested in was the height limit that we have for residential buildings. And the concern that's been raised to me by some neighbors that if they're raising their house to get it out of the floodplain and it incidentally went over the height limit, I would think we should just waive that for homes being raised in the floodplain if they're not changing the roof line.
Okay. Do we have consensus about a discussion regarding sort of just revisiting the regulations regarding ADUs
Yes.
as being something that would be on the,
Yes.
like to see on a future agenda? And I guess actually how we were going to do this, I'm realizing now. But anyways, let's discuss it. Height limit in floodplain. That I think happy to have a is that something else that others would like to have on the agenda?
Well, it's, the city of Venice is sinking over there on the east side, and,
Well, I will, yeah.
Yeah, so to me, it's, is the massing in a residential area set to basically accommodate 2 floors, and so you set it like that, but if you add the extra 5 feet, is it making it really short floors, and so therefore we should, so I guess an evaluation of what the criteria was for the height limits in those areas?
Well, yeah,
But
this has come up a little bit. Okay.
And one of the other things, and I'm not sure if this is really the purview of the Planning Commission, the issue of people that do raise their homes, depending on what's done, you may spend $100,000 raising and leveling your home and then redoing, some of the infrastructure, ducts and things like that associated with it. But you haven't really added $100,000 value to your home from the standpoint of assessment. And somebody else that is out of the floodplain does the same remodel, but they would spend $100,000 less. And so can the proportion of the funds, the money that you would spend on the raising and leveling the house to get it to FEMA standard, is there a way to avoid adding that as an assessment to the house?
It's an interesting question, but I think it's a much bigger topic than the Planning Commission can really tackle. It's my initial thoughts on that. But happy to talk to you about it, and maybe we can think about that with the Finance Department and the County Assessor's Office ultimately is the folks that would actually have to get on board with that, right?
Is there a
Yeah, so-
list somewhere that exists that shows what improvements can be assessed and which ones are exempt?
That'll be the
We'll
purview
follow.
of the county, but we can look
But
at
it
that.
just, if, it must be written down in a list somewhere that we could read.
I'll check. I think there's some threshold at which we send stuff to the county's assessors and downstairs in terms of building permits, but it may be everything.
okay. With all of that said, is that all we have to have said? So let's adjourn at 9:40.